Good evening, everybody. My name is Steffi Singh, and I'm here with you this evening to discuss education for the prevention of gender-based violence with the wonderful John Doran. John is a TEDx speaker. He is the author of Ways to Wellbeing. He is a fellow educator with over 25 years experience teaching, and he's an all-round amazing guy, if I may say so myself. He is also a board member of the Make-A-Wish Foundation for Ireland and generally just has done phenomenal work within the space of working with young people in this country. And welcome, John, firstly. Delighted to have you here today.
It's a pleasure to share this time with you, Steffi.
And I'm really excited for some of the topics that we're going to discuss this evening. John, if we'd start off this evening, having worked within the education system as many years as you have, and also personally for me working within the education system for a number of years as a teacher, we find that there's many constraints within the current system. For example, it rewards a certain type of learner. We also have, I suppose, a bit of a gap between the subjects which are taught at school versus the realities of the working world, and some of the kind of, the jobs market and how technology has changed that over the last number of years. I also found in my experience teaching, and I'm sure that yours has been pretty similar, but I would love to hear more from you, that I had a lot of frustration with the supports that were available for very vulnerable students, and particularly in relation to issues around gender-based violence, domestic violence, and some of these other kind of, I suppose, difficult issues to deal with. Not that there's a one-size-fits-all solutions, but I suppose, how do you think, if we start off the conversation tonight by saying, how do you think we should address some of the common issues and some of the common constraints that we have within the current education system? And I know there's a kind of big question there, but we'll break it down.
Well, I'd agree with your original premise, Steffi, that, the school system at the moment is perfectly designed for a world that no longer exists.
Yes.
And I think that's a big issue. And I'm kind of thinking about this today. How do you know you've had a good education? I mean, we've all been through it. I was thinking that if you've left school and you don't have a sense of who you are, you have no idea of your values or your potential, I think that school has failed you, to be honest. And that's irrespective of however points you come out with. And I think, unfortunately or regrettably, school fails far too many of students. And that's a real issue. And you mentioned AI. And I think what got us to here won't get us to the next level. So I think we have to reimagine education and actually make sure that the customer or the students at the center of it. And I'm not so sure they are as of yet. I mean, I teach, my office is about 100 feet away from the very first classroom I ever entered in 1984, and it's still the very same. So there's something strange about an education. A world is so different, and yet an educational system that's still very, very similar to people. So if you went into a classroom tomorrow, Steffi, it would look the very same as when you left it. So I think there's a lot of catch-up that is needed,
That is so true, John. I suppose it's not that long since I left it. I'm already out of the classroom 2 years exactly now. And I suppose for context of our listeners tonight, I did a career change. So I moved from working within the teaching industry, or the education system, I guess, to working within the tech industry. And John, I left the education system partly because of my frustrations with the kind of issues that you've just outlined, that there was such a gap there, and the fact that it was so slow moving, and so set in its ways. And when I left, I found that only for me, it more I suppose it basically made me feel like that I was right. Those ideas that I had around this was too fixated on the worries of the past. It didn't match the working world. The gap was enormous between working in the tech industry and being in the education system. And it only reinforced, I suppose, my previous beliefs, thinking that, we need to move a lot faster here. It's not fast enough. It's nowhere near fast enough. How do we, I suppose, address that? How do we get people on board with the idea of understanding how big these gaps are, and that we don't have the time to wait 15, 20, 30 years to change these issues? It can't move at the same slow pace as it did before.
I think for too many people, it's a cognitive connectedness experience. I mean, for a lot of young people, their experience of education is a teacher passes their notes into their heads, and on some predetermined date, the young person, that they successfully regurgitate what was put in the first place, they get a certain grade. That's not going to serve them in the world that we're entering. You know, there's a different skill set. You're talking about agility, you're thinking about creative solutions, you're looking at decision making. You're not just talking about rote learning and good memories. And so there's a lot of skill sets and emotional intelligences that young people possess. But if you judge a person's ability if you judge a fish's ability to climb a tree, the fish is going to think it's stupid. And too many people are being judged by that yardstick. I mean, I have young people who are in special needs, but can create or put together a bicycle for you, or get to level
I had the
A
same experience.
in some computer game. So I think we need to create a system or a culture where the multiplicity of young people's gifts and talents can be celebrated, affirmed, and actually made feel actually of value. There's too many young people competing in a race, they're always going to come last. And it's very hard to keep your motivation up if every day you're coming into a school system which doesn't celebrate your strengths and your gifts and your potential.
Yeah, that's so true, John. And I had the same experience. I mean, working, I was an English and history teacher, and, Shakespeare's not for everybody. That is a fact. Shakespeare is not everybody's thing. And it was so sad to see, that you're funneled. The students are so funneled to behave in a certain manner, to wear the same uniform, to have the same kind of responses, the sitting. All of that doesn't really mimic the kind of the new normal or the new working world. I always think that it's never going to be a case of when you're working in tech, your boss is never going to respond by saying, don't Google that if you are not, sure about something. So I find it really strange when we teach students to not find support, to not speak to the person beside them. I think it's really important to move towards that model of active learning and engaging with your peers in order to address problems and to find solutions. So yeah, I think that's something that we really have to work hard on in this country in particular.
Yeah, well, we're kind of in a way, Steffi, we're probably in a post-information world. I mean, there's not much that a young person can ask me that they can't find on Google. So, and that's been true. I mean,
true.
A young person said to me once, "Sir, why do we need teachers? Because there's nothing you can't tell me I can find in Google." And like a good teacher, I let the silent do the heavy listening. And another young person said, "Sir doesn't teach us history. He teaches us a love of history." And I think tapping into a young person's passion, and you mentioned that, Steffi, giving young people a sense of themselves, a sense of their voice, their unique voice. That's the critical piece in education, that each person has a contribution to make, to look at solutions, to look at creativity. And I, as Sir Ken Robinson, who recently tragically passed, he talked about celebrating the sciences and the arts and music and drama and creativity. And who said that, Irish, English and maths had to be at the top of the hierarchy of subjects? I mean, what about other subjects? And I would subscribe to that philosophy of looking at a broader definition of education and looking at things like emotional intelligence and looking at stress management. I mean, teaching a young person how to manage themselves, how to empathize with other people, how to actually have a good relationship with themselves and others. I mean, the most important person they'll ever talk to in their lives, the young person, is themselves. How is that conversation going for them? And too many young people will say to you, education is not real and relevant and speaking to their needs. And I think we have to have a closer alignment between the skills of business and the world of work, but also the skills of life and actually managing yourself for the stresses of life. To say that on average, every 7 days, you'll face some type of adversity. So how are we preparing young people, not just for a life of tests, but for the tests of life?
That is so true, John. And I mean, I couldn't agree more. It's not just about the subjects or the work, even preparing students, for the world of work. It's about preparing them for life and having the emotional intelligence to have the resilience to deal with some of the pressing issues that we're now facing. COVID-19 is a perfect example of that, and how much resilience and flexibility and adaptability that you need to not just work in this environment and continue education, but just to function on a daily basis. It's an incredibly changing and challenging time for students. But if we to go back for a moment to the gender-based violence aspect of this, I suppose and you may have found the same thing as a teacher and as a pastor and as a counsellor that you've worked with in this role, and I found it from an English perspective, where you start to get a first kind of sense of if there is a problem in the home. One of the first places that it can present is in school. And I found it, very hard as a teacher to be able to do something adequate with information. If I was presented with information in relation to a child that was potentially in a difficult situation, there wasn't a lot of resources, there were not a lot of supports. And over the last number of years in schools, we've had fundings cut to guidance counselling. We've basically removed that element of school that's so important. Kind of what's your thoughts on that, or kind of how can we, I suppose, support vulnerable students better over the last couple of months, again with COVID, not to press on it over and over again as the issue, but it's put students in an even more vulnerable position. What's your thoughts on that? How can we address some of those issues?
When I sometimes I have a mixed emotion about the word well-being, and sometimes people call me a well-being guru, and I think we do too much. It's become a debased word, a cliche. And I think what we need to do coming out of this, Steffi, is actually to pay more than lip service. We need to put flesh on the bones of well-being, and we need to fund the resources adequately. It's disgraceful at the moment where a young person, if they're referred to CAMS, there's a waiting list, Pieta House, all of the support services that young people so vitally need, their access to them is very, very limited indeed. And I think we need to really support our young people. If they have the courage to come forward and to actually voice their concerns, they need to be addressed in a far more meaningful way, and also the supports in place. And I hear what you're saying too, Steffi, about teachers. I mean, teachers have been asked to do more and more with less and less, and if society gets an itch, teachers are expected to scratch it, and I think it's unfair. And I see it in my own school, and I think we really need to resource well-being. It's the biggest issue at the moment is actually, I think, the well-being of young people and their mental health. And I think at the moment we're failing them in many ways. There's too many young people waiting to see psychiatrists, waiting to see psychologists, waiting for the support services. There's too many waiting lists there, and we really need to be supporting them financially as well as kind of emotionally, but we need to put in the money where the mouth is.
Yeah, absolutely, John. And I think one of the things, and I have your book behind me here, and I have actually myself went through the book, and I was thinking about it, from a user's experience and also from a teaching perspective, if I was to teach students using this book. And it's such a wonderful resource to have. But I suppose one of the things that is very seldom spoke about in relation to mental health is how much action and discipline that it requires. That it's not a case of, I think there's a lot of buzzwords around mental health, and that we are open to more discussions around mental health, but we're not so open to, what it actually takes to address potentially addiction issues, or a domestic violence issues, or other issues that maybe students are experiencing in the home. And it might be a case of them having to eliminate, toxic behaviors or people later in their life, in order to have that mental health. And it's something that's really, I suppose, not addressed.
I would say two things to that, Steffi. Firstly, we're all in the midst of a pandemic, and that has brought its own adversities and challenges to each and every one of us. But I firmly believe that some of the greatest gifts come wrapped in sandpaper, that in every adversity, there's an equal, if not greater, opportunity. And that opportunity is all of our well-being now is called into question. From mum to dad to granddad, we've all kind of gone through our own travails. And I think now we can take well-being and mental health out of the dark recesses of the corner and into the light, to talk about our own mental hygiene. That mental hygiene is something that, our dental hygiene, we sometimes spend more time on our dental hygiene than we do in the 6 inches of precious real estate between our ears. So it's really important that we bring it into the light, have the conversation about our well-being and our mental well-being, and actually mind our minds, and do it unambiguously, unashamedly, and have those conversations, Steffi, that were swept under the carpet years and years ago. And the problem with sweeping the dirt under the carpet is the dirt stays there. And too many times in Ireland, particularly, the conversations that we needed to have about mental health were not had. I think the present pandemic gives us an opportunity between the generations to talk in a meaningful way about what matters most. And Charles Lindbergh said, we talk least about the things we think about the most. Now let's bring that out into the light where we can actually talk about minding our minds. And I think, my favorite definition of education, and we started talking about that, is that it's a conversation between one generation and another about what really matters. And everybody, Steffi, everybody's entitled to the best possible life. And you can't have that best possible life and that best possible future without managing and minding yourself effectively. So it all starts with what you're allowing you're thinking, and realizing that, you know, your thoughts aren't facts. Now, we're not taught that strategically. We pick this information up as we go haphazardly. But I think we need to teach this self-efficacy strategically and by design. It's as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic, the relationship we have with oneself. And I think now is the time to bring this fully into the light and have this conversation between the generations about what's important and, you know, what's not important. And I think we're, you know, in this next normal we're seeing the line between stuff that we were worried about and fussing about wasn't really important. People are what's important, not things, people.
That's so true, John. And I think, again, if you were to look at, you know, some of our neighbours in Finland, Scandinavian countries, they've done a lot of work over the last 20 years in terms of teaching emotional intelligence. And you're starting to see a huge benefit of that now, 20 or 30 years kind of later. I think I have a lot of frustration with the Irish system that it seems to be so entrenched in the ideas of the past. You know, the Leaving Cert hasn't evolved much in the last 20 years at all. We still have this big summative exam, the stress, the anxiety that produces for students. And it's quite unnecessary because it's not, as I'm sure you're well aware, a reflection of a student's true intelligence or ability, because it doesn't necessarily cater to all intelligences. So I think it's quite frustrating for many that it's taking such a long time for these things to kind of move, and these ideas around well-being. And I know the kind of buzzword of it again is one thing, but to actually do change it, to implement change in that regard is quite a challenge, and it does take time, but it just seems to be very slow moving. And I'm hoping, I don't know about you, but I'm hoping that COVID will actually speed that process up.
Well, I think it's about it. To me, it's an emotional connectedness experience, and I would speak to two things about that. I think I see huge potential amongst the pain, and by that I'm very conscious, acutely aware that teachers are suffering at the moment. I mean,
yeah, I agree.
You know, I was talking to colleagues last week, and a principal came upon a teacher in their car crying. And he said, you know what, I can't cope with this. I can't cope with the masks. My 9-year-old stayed up all last night, couldn't sleep because they were worried the Santa couldn't come. You know, and the pain of that. And I'm telling students to be kinder, that we're all under a degree of stress, that we're all under stress, but there's a stress at the moment that I've never seen before in the system. You know, where you can't go to the staff room to connect to people. You're eating your lunch in your car. You're meeting people from a distance, and people need people. And that's the circumstances and the environment people face in. So I think actually students who have got remarkable faith in see this, and I see a kindness in schools, an understanding and an awareness that, you know what, teachers are not just kind of automatons. They're actually human beings with flesh and blood and families and stories. And everybody has a story, and no young person leaves their story or checks it in the classroom door. And just to see people, not just as a student, but as a person. And I think that's really important also, reciprocally, for a student to see a teacher, not just as a teacher, but as a person as well. And with that kindness, I think there's a relational shift that can really add value and a richness to education, because, you know, it's amazing, I think, the challenges that sometimes a young person will face. And you mentioned it, from violence in the background. Everybody has a story, but you're not that story. You don't have to be a victim. You know, you can actually, if you haven't got the circumstances that you want, you can actually create the circumstances that you need to go forward. And it's giving the young people the tools and the awareness to go along with those tools that I think is, when we get it right, the power of education to make sure that demography doesn't have to be destiny.
That is so true, John. And you know, one of the first things that drew me to your work was looking at your TED Talk, and you have talk about this specific teacher. And this teacher, her message and her motto has always stuck with me, is, if it is to be, it is up to me. And I can't remember the name of the teacher, but I had a similar experience. You know, my own education, there was this one particular teacher who saw something in me at quite a difficult point in my life. And, you know, it can lead to such profound change in the long run if you are able to kind of catch a student and allow them to realize that, you know, their destiny is not defined yet. Their whole life is ahead of them, and that they have the ability to change those circumstances. And you know, you mentioned their gender-based violence, and that's, I suppose, something that we are here today to discuss in particular. And I think you mentioned a little bit about kind of the history in Ireland around gender-based violence. Unfortunately, it's been something that's been a huge issue here over time. You know, we look at things like the Magdalene laundries has been there recently. You know, we haven't exactly got our cervical check scandal. We've had the Me Too movement here. We've had the In Her Shoes movement here. We've had a lot of years of, exactly as you're saying, swiping things under the carpet and hoping that they'll go away. How do you think, I suppose, the education system can support more openness in this regard, so that we're enabling young people to say that, okay, these were the mistakes that we made in the past in relation to gender, particularly issues around women? How do we address that in the future? How do we address that going forward?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's no simplistic answers, but I think perhaps the solution lies in creating a safe emotional space for young people who are incredible to actually articulate their views and actually to step into their own power, you know, to actually take charge of their own agency and their own ability, and to move away from what I call learned helplessness. That's the idea that, look, I can't have any effect on the outcome here. And actually, young people are probably the most active generation in terms of the environment, in terms of gender rights, in terms of equality that we've ever had, in terms of all across the way. And I think it's helping them and empowering them and creating a space where they can actually articulate those views and giving them the tools and the communication ability to actually affect, I suppose, a conversation around it. And I think that's the reason, is to have that conversation, find somebody you can talk to, and actually step into that power and that agency. And I think teachers have a role in being able to facilitate, enable, empower, and encourage that type of proactivity where it comes to issues that are really central to the lives of a lot of young people.
Yeah, and it's been a particularly challenging time. Again, you know, when we look at the statistics that are going for agencies, like Safe Ireland, for example, you know, we've seen the huge surge in domestic violence, and there's a huge kind of, I suppose, outcry from people that were already in vulnerable positions, but because of COVID, they've now found their situation has exacerbated quite quickly. So I think it's really important, you know, again, from my experience, I think it's one thing to get the students to have the conversation and to get people talking. It's another thing to be able to do something with that conversation and provide the supports and the resources, because having awareness is not as simple a solution as such. You know, we need to have supports in place to help students progress when they are coming from those quite difficult situations.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Steffi. And also I'd add in, you know, the typical Irish issue of drink and alcohol.
Yeah.
And I was in Super Value yesterday, and other supermarkets are available. And the ridiculously low cost of alcohol. It's almost
Yeah.
incentivizing or encouraging people to drink to excess, and particularly being home in lockdown. And I think that there is a link between excessive alcohol consumption and gender-based violence and violence of all sorts. And so
Yes.
it's actually having a good relationship with substances like alcohol, and a more mature, and I suppose dealing with emotional turmoil in a way that's positive and productive and not actually self-defeating. I remember talking to somebody and they said, the day I tried to stop drowning my sorrows, it was when I realized that my sorrows had learned to swim. Sometimes we deal with our issues in a way that's almost self-harm. We try to drown those sorrows in alcohol or substance misuse. And I suppose that's another issue to having that conversation, is to actually take that pain, take that energy, and actually do something more positive and productive with it. That's not actually making a bad problem even worse again.
Yeah, that's so true, John. And I completely agree. I mean, that's been a profound issue, particularly in Ireland. And I'm sure it is in many countries at the moment, but it has been something that's been a profound issue here for many years. And also, I suppose, maybe perhaps in the past, many families, for economic reasons, were not able to maybe have autonomy to make decisions around having options to protect themselves if they're in those situations.
Yeah.
And I suppose as it goes forward and as time has gone forward, it's really important that we enable young people to understand, you know, that these behaviors are not normal.
I would also say, Steffi, there's huge power in reaching out I would also encourage people who are in pain of whatever sort, be it through violence, emotional or verbal or physical, to reach
Yeah,
out, not to suffer in silence, actually to
absolutely.
take that step, to take action. You know, the two things we have control over are our attitude and our actions. And we've got 100% control over both of those. And I think it's important to reach out. There's huge power in vulnerability, Steffi. You know, I mean, none of us have it all sorted. This thing called life, none of us have it all sorted or all down. We can put on this great mask to the world, and particularly in Ireland, I often think that the words "I'm grand" cover a multitude. You know, how are you? I'm grand. I could be dying inside, but I'll tell you, I'm grand. And I
Yeah.
sometimes, when I ask somebody, "How are you?" I'll say, "How are you really?" And they say, "Well, you know what, I'm okay." And suddenly the real story comes out. And even that, just that gesture, and I think it's really important that, particularly in COVID, particularly where we don't have that proximity to people, that we notice, appreciate, and thank people, that we make the contact with people. I call it the 10-5, the 10-5 rule. It was brought in America, that if I come within 10 feet of somebody, I look in the direction and I smile and I make eye contact. If I come within 5 feet, I smile and make eye contact and I say, "How are you?" And it's amazing the difference it makes. A young person yesterday, I overheard him. He's a first year. He said, "That Dorn fella, he always says hello to me. I don't have him, but he's actually all." It made a difference. It made a difference. And I think particularly in school communities, I would urge people to kind of follow that 10-5 rule. Just make that contact, make that connection. Let nobody be invisible in your workplace, in your community, in your school. It's showing a kind of a solidarity, a collegiality. We're all in it together. And if when we come out of this, I hope that we remember that sense of community, that people need people. And for people who are suffering, not to do so in silence, to reach out. We all have a story. We all have issues. Some are more issues than others. But there's actually great power in actually saying, "You know what? I'm vulnerable." And that all stoicism, I think, is kind of from the past, particularly with men who kind of said, you know, "Suffer in silence, suck it up. It's not good to talk." I think those days are should be over. It's that's the old world. I think in this new world, we kind of, you know what, it's okay to be not okay, and it's always okay to talk to somebody or ask for a bit of help.
Yeah, that's so true, John. It's an excellent point. And yeah, it's okay to not be okay. And also, I think to be able to speak to people who, misery loves company is another phrase that I definitely comes to mind when you're speaking about that. And it's a big difference between, sharing your woes with somebody who is, not in a position maybe to be able to support you in that, and to be able to allow you to find maybe sustainable solutions, or ways to improve the situation, and really to create long-term progressive change, and to make really profound change, and really make progress in life. You really have to be able to surround yourself with a lot of
Yeah.
positive influences, a positive peer group, people who are going in the same direction, or in that positive direction, because it's very easy to fall into the other negative kind of patterns.
I completely 100% agree. I call them the mood hoovers, the
Yeah.
confiscators of life footballs. You know, the people who find fault like there's a reward going for it. And I think you are right, Steffi. I say to people, surround yourself with wizards, not lizards. You know, I'm very protective of my energy, and energy,
Yeah.
not time, is the ultimate arbiter of performance. So, and I call it a strategic optimism. You know, the glass half full for an optimist, well, it's half full, and he likes the glass, and he thinks somebody's going to be along in a minute to fill it. The pessimist, well, the glass is half empty. And I think strategic optimism, Steffi, is entertaining the belief, or the possibility, entertaining the belief that things can get better on the other side of this experience. And I call that strategic optimism. Now, Pollyanna optimism is an untethered helium balloon. I'm not advocating that. That's kind of a unrealistic optimism. But a strategic optimism is saying, you know what, this is temporary. Things can get better. With a positive attitude, good people supporting you, and the right action, I can actually triumph over my circumstances. And you know what, Steffi? A sense of humor. A sense of humor is so important as well. You know, it can help you. It can help you tackle the terrible and overcome the unexpected. And you know what? To just get over some of the things, I think keep your sense of humor as well. It's amazing in Ireland. You know, we're kind of known for this kind of sense of humor. Like when you're laughing, levels of cortisol rapidly diminish. So actually, to try and find the humor in something as well, wherever you can, never miss a laugh, because laughter is the shortest distance between two people.
That's so true, John. Your attitude is just so brilliant, and I love, that kind of sense of positivity because, as you said, it's so easy to slip into the negative thought patterns, and the why is this happening to me, and that kind of sense of helplessness in it. But I suppose in every given situation, there is an element of choice, and when we're speaking about issues, and particularly this whole process of activism, 16 days, is around gender-based violence, and I suppose, and irrespective of gender in general, we all have options and ways that we can, I suppose, try and escape these situations. But we need to go to positive people is kind of the key message there. That you need to be surrounding yourself with positive people who are taking actions to remove themselves from those kind of situations.
I want to share with you a story. A couple of years ago, a young person who I can still see as I speak about him. At 2 o'clock in the morning, because of violence in the household, his mom, himself, and his two daughters had to sleep in the car overnight.
Yeah.
He came in the next day to school. He was dressed in his uniform, and none of the other teachers were aware. I was aware of what he had experienced.
Yeah.
And he had a very turbulent time, worried about his daughters and the effect that the breakup was having, and on his mum, who was suffering as well. 2 years later, I remember so proud as he graduated. And I make the distinction between what I call basement thinking and balcony thinking. Now, basement thinking is blame, excuses, and denial. I call it victim thinking. I call it why me thinking. And he could have easily been why me? Why does this happen to me? Why are these circumstances my circumstances? But instead of that, he was a balcony thinker. And by balcony thinker, I call it ownership, acceptance, and responsibility. And I said to the young man, we'll call him Paul. Paul was not his name. I said, Paul, what was those moments teaching you? And he stopped for a second. He said, you know what, sir, one day, please God, I'm going to be a dad, and I will never treat my children the way my mum was treated, the way I was treated. And I said, wow, what a balcony teacher. What a balcony thinker. This is a guy who's actually turning trouble into triumph. He's turning fear into fuel. And that's the difference, Steffi, is how you actually respond to the circumstance. So it's not the event. It's actually how you respond to the event that determines the outcome. And he was shown that balcony. I mean, you're not responsible for what happens to you in this life, Steffi. Some people get awful circumstances come their way. But I think you are always responsible for how you respond to those circumstances. And how you respond to those circumstances will determine the trajectory of your life. And I think that, to me, was a balcony thinker. He took ownership of it. He accepted the things that he could change. He accepted the things he couldn't change. And he took responsibility. He stepped into his power. He got a great leaving certificate. And I know that young man at the moment is doing fantastically well in college. He wasn't a victim and he wasn't a statistic. He chose to take back his power and say, you know what? What's this present moment teaching me? And how can I use this as fertilizer to get better on the other side of it? He saw it as transitory. He didn't see it as defining his life. So I call balcony thinking what next? Solution focused. So he was a balcony thinker rather than a basement thinker.
Oh, it's so true, John. And it's kind of simple analogy that you have two brothers, and one, grows up, sees their father is an alcoholic, one becomes an alcoholic, and one decides he's never going to drink again for the rest of his life. There's always that element of choice there, and I think it's so important that the education system enables that it enables, again, with gender-based violence, that if you see violence in the home, that the education system is supporting you to understand that does not have to be repeated, in your own life going forward. And there's great agency and I suppose a great hope that we can, over time, really encourage those kind of conversations. John, we had one question that just popped up on the screen there a second ago, and I haven't got the full question again in front of me, but it was something along the lines of, I think Deirdre Carberry had a question there around gender norms and how do we address, so we have education, strong education systems are such a critical element to a healthy, sustainable and productive society. How can we drive institutional change within our education system and encourage educators and stakeholders to see the importance of understanding gender and gender dynamics and how they play a key role in the shaping and influencing of gender norms? And this is quite a topical issue as well at the moment. What's your thoughts on that, John?
Well, I suppose the present circumstances give a fantastic, maybe a once in a lifetime opportunity to present issues like gender and other issues, because everything's in the melting pot at the moment, isn't it? We're reimagining. we're reimagining education for the 21st century, and part of that reimagining is the role of gender in it, and to have that conversation around it. So I think it's actually a very exciting time to be discussing and airing those issues, to make sure that issues like gender, issues like education and its relevance to everybody, that everybody gets a fair crack at the whip. So I think actually it's a very exciting time, Steffi, to be airing these conversations and actually say, well, you know, what's serving everybody? Well, how do we move forward from where we are? We can't go back, but how can we move forward in a way that's meaningful, real, and relevant to all young people? So I actually think it's, in many ways, it's a very exciting time to be in education, to be a student, to be a teacher, to be within education. There's an opportunity that if we grasp it, we can actually put flesh in the bones of meaningful change.
That's so true, John. And I think it's kind of a perfect segue into my next thought, which is around the opportunities within my current field, having went from the education system into the tech field. You know, one of the things that I think is so important that we address when we talk about gender-based violence and gender-based issues is things like the gender pay gap. And universally at the moment, we have a 20% pay gap across the majority of industries between males and females doing similar roles. We also have a situation where there's a recent PwC survey, and it displayed some of the huge gaps we have. At less than 5% of technology leaders in the UK are female. We have a tiny percentage of uptake of STEM subjects, again, with female participants. And, you know, there's so many amazing opportunities within the field of tech for females, because I think people don't realize that, you know, the powers that be are constantly trying to improve the situation and encourage more women and girls to work within the industry. And I think something that was quite a misconception that I've seen myself is that when you work within the tech industry, everybody thinks that that means that you're, you know, kind of engineering and doing mathematics all day long. But there's a whole variety of skills that are required to work within tech, you know, whether you're working with marketing or project management or program management. It's a huge industry and it has lots of moving components. It's not a case of having to take this one segment of society and this is the only opportunities available. There's huge amount of opportunities available for both genders, but particularly to encourage women and girls. How do we do that within the education system as it currently stands? How do we educate the system itself to realize that, you know, that this change is taking place, and how do we encourage more girls to get involved in these kind of subjects?
I think it starts with belief. I think you can't be it unless you see it. And you look at aviation, I think only 7% of the world's pilots are women. And there's an amazing trailblazer called Lisa Cusick. And Lisa Cusick is a pilot, the captain of the biggest Airbus in the Aer Lingus fleet. It's extraordinary. And I think we have to start with young women in school and break that glass ceiling. Like, you know, I did a thing for GCAS, the world's biggest aviation company. And in aviation, at the C-suite level, there's an appreciation that there's not enough women in the executive C-suites in the world of aviation and in other areas in tech, etc. So I would wholeheartedly agree with that, Steffi. And I think it starts with that belief that young women don't just have to go into what was traditionally defined as gender-based roles, that it's all open for them. It's absolutely, there's no ceiling anymore.
It's so true. When I was going to school, it was nurse, teacher, and that was it. There was no other options even discussed.
So I think, you know, STEM shows, you know, an amazing opportunity. There's an amazing lady called Ali Rose Sisk, and she came home from, she did
I know Ali.
Yeah, she did a piece for the Make-A-Wish Foundation recently, Make-A-Wish Leaders Program, and so many fantastic women have done it. And she came home from England working in tech. She's a nurse, so many skill sets that she has. So I think it's very exciting. But to answer your question specifically, Steffi, we need to give young women the belief that they can be anything that they want to be. They can't be everything. We can't be everything in life, but we can be anything we want to be. So not to see the ceilings anymore, the sky is the limit. And we have to give that belief and that confidence. And confidence to me is the belief that you can be the best you can be, not necessarily the best, but you can be the best that you can be in any discipline or domain you choose. So I think it starts with belief and confidence and getting young girls to aspire to do whatever they want to do, irregardless of whether the discipline was traditionally assigned to be male or female. Those limits no longer apply.
It's so true, John. They no longer exist, but you're right. You need good role models. You need to see people. You need to see women in leadership positions. You need to see them across a huge breadth of industries where you wouldn't traditionally see females. And there's lots of different policies that need to be put in place as well to support women in the workplace and allow them to
I want
continue.
to add something to that, Steffi, because somebody like you who shows such great leadership in this. I would encourage any young person looking at this here, particularly a young girl that aspires to have the careers that you've had, Steffi, to move from education to Facebook and to be doing so well in it. Find somebody who thinks and operates on a level that you want to think and operate. We all need a mentor. We all need a champion. I mean, your career would be decided in a room that you're not in. So I would ask young people to get on LinkedIn, create a platform. They all have Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat. Get on LinkedIn, find your Steffi Singh, find somebody like Steffi, reach out to her and say, Steffi, how did you make it? Was life a champagne supernova for you? Was life like a candy floss bounce on a marshmallow trampoline? And Steffi will tell you, no, it wasn't. I had my adversity, but here's how I came about it. Here's the mindset and the tools that I use. So I would encourage all young people looking at here, be you male or female, to reach out to people like Steffi, somebody who's on that road. There's no road a young person can be thinking of that somebody hasn't been there before. Ask somebody. The best way to find out the road ahead is to ask somebody on the way back. And I think young people don't use that superpower enough, Steffi. Reach out to somebody who's on that level that you want to aspire to be. And in my experience, people are very willing to help you if you ask them. Steffi's not telepathic. She's got many skills, but telepathy, I don't think is one, Steffi. You can confirm that. But there could be a student in Dublin or Singapore or in Delhi saying, golly, I'd love to talk to Steffi. She's on LinkedIn, and so many other people are. And I've been helped, Steffi, by so many people.
John, it's so true.
I know you too. So I would encourage any young person looking here, reach out to people. You never know how your life can change on the other side of the next connection, the next email, the next person that you meet. Your life can change forever.
It's so true. And I'm telling you one thing, when I meet people like you in the education system that are in it as long as you have been, and that have such a wonderful progressive outlook and mindset, it's such a valuable thing. You're changing a whole community that's going to come in the generations that follow. And I'm just I'm delighted for you, and the work that you've done over the last couple of years has just been absolutely incredible.
Steffi, I want to give a shout out to colleagues in education. I mean, they've been doing a lot of work under unprecedented times. And you know what? They never suffered an overdose of appreciation or a surplus of gratitude, on the front pages of the paper or on Twitter. But I think teachers have been fantastic in the present predicament, and also principals and management as well, keeping the show on the road. Teachers scared to go in, have families at home. So I think a massive shout out needs to go to educators, both in the primary space, in the secondary space, in the university space, because it's been a fantastic combined effort between parents, between teachers, and between students, and it's brought out the best of people. And I think a collegiality, and I think we need to really affirm that. And let's not forget that if we go back to normal, and I have my issues around that, because normal didn't work for too many people. Normal alienated and disenfranchised too many people. So I don't want to go back to normal. I want to go back to a normal that's kinder, that's more civil and more appreciative of people, I hope, within the education sphere. Because you know what? Everybody can look back at a teacher that inspired them to be better, to do more, to be more. And I think we need people like that in education. We need our brightest and our best in education in front of young people, the most precious natural resource we have in this world.
That is so true. The investment for the future, I mean, it's absolutely everything. And I really, truly, firmly believe that education gives you a platform from which you can go anywhere. That has always been my central belief since I started my studies all those years ago. John, we have to leave it there. You've been absolutely smashing as per usual. And thank you so much for coming on to speak to us this evening. And I wish you all the best and have a lovely evening. Thank you, John.
You too. Take care, Steffi.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.